My brother and I had already visited every house along our neighborhood to collect our treats just like every other Halloween. The other kids already went back home, but our parents went out to party with their buddies, and we had nowhere to go. We eventually got bored, and the night was still long. My brother would get feisty if he was left doing nothing, and so I had to think of something to do. In order to kill some time, we went to the other vicinities that we had never been before. We passed through the alleys and into the smaller communities. We were told not to go to those places since the neighborhood around those areas were pretty rough, but we were looking for something to do and perhaps see something quite exciting. And just as we had hoped, there was a house in that area that was glowing with the orange lights of numerous jack-o'-lanterns all over the yard. Their lively yet spooky music was blaring out through their walls and windows, and it was the only house that was active in that dark residence. They were obviously having some fun in there, and we got quite curious. We decided to knock on the door to see what was happening. I banged my knuckles against the door quite aggressively since it was hard to hear anything else with the music playing so loud. And then, a very tall guy in a black suit finally opened the door. I assumed that he was dressed as a vampire, although his costume was quite bland. He had a long face with his hair brushed up very neatly. He smiled at us and said nothing for a brief moment. We extended our arms with our baskets to ask for a treat. However, he had no treats to give out. Instead, he opened the door of the house completely to show us the lively party inside. He told us that we were very welcome to join. We shouldn't be joining a gathering of people we didn't know, and we shouldn't enter a house in the neighborhood which we were told not to go. However, the inviting atmosphere and the lively crowd was simply too hard to resist. We walked inside the house and immediately were given a green jello and a red shake as we sat down on the couch. Every single one of them was wearing a full-on costume with heavy prosthetics on their faces. There were those guised as werewolves with actual fur attached to their faces along with the ears and the fangs. There were ghouls crawling on all fours while holding their plates between their teeth. There were those who were dressed as monsters with extra limbs and blood-stained clothes. My brother and I were delighted and baffled at the same time. They were dancing with the beat of the loud music while munching different snacks served on the table. Everything in there was along with the Halloween theme. Every single dessert was shaped in human body parts such as eyes on a red pudding or fingers dipped in cheese and ketchup. There was even an amputated foot stuffed with different cuts of bit-sized meats on sticks. Aside from the punches, shakes, and various drinks, the crowd was also served with a hefty buffet. The long table on the dining area was filled with heavy meals that were creatively presented with the spirit of the holiday. They didn't just look and smell quite tasty, they were spooky as well. The cuts of the meats were shaped like amputated human limbs topped with a glazed sauce. There was even a ground meat served in a real-looking skull to make it look like a brain. The server, who was dressed like an orc with blood-stained apron, just kept on filling the table with various dishes, and the attendants just kept on eating them the entire time. My brother and I tried almost everything, and we both agreed that it tasted so different from the meats that we were used to. They also loved strong flavored sauces, which I personally did not enjoy. Everybody inside that house was simply having fun, and so were we. We thought that we were quite lucky to come across this well-lit home and join their very lively Halloween party. But I eventually realized that I was gravely mistaken. When we came to see something spooky and thrilling just to kill some time, we did not expect to be a part of this unlikely gathering. In a night filled with horror and delight, we did not expect that we would walk right into a gathering of real monsters. The elaborate and realistic costumes of the attendants were not costumes at all. When I saw one of the undead sitting on the couch and casually snapping his neck back in place when somebody knocked it over, I knew right there and then that he was not a human. The one in the costume of a werewolf spiked his fangs out when he ravaged the leg bone on the table. And it was then when I also discovered something about the food. My brother was biting on a finger, which he thought was some chicken tenders dipped in cheese and ketchup. And I realized that it was not when I saw the bone. The food that was being served in the party was not ordinary food. They were not shaped into eyeballs, human limbs, nor human fingers. They were actual body parts. They were richly marinated and accompanied with strong sauces which hid the actual taste of human flesh. My vomit immediately rose up to my throat, and I held it in my mouth in order not to be noticed. My brother was still munching on the fingers, and I decided not to tell him yet. Cold sweats flowed across my face as my hands and knees were starting to shake. We were surrounded by various creatures of the night, and we just ate our fellow kind. I discreetly stood up from the couch and grabbed my brother's arm. But since he was yet to realize that he was eating an actual human finger, he was still having a blast. He shook off my hand and refused to come with me. I told him that our parents might be looking for us already, but he knew that I was lying and aggressively told me off. Since he kept on resisting, we eventually caused a scene as our voices rose. The attendants started to gather around us and told us not to fight. They seemed to behave quite humanly despite of eating a human. Even though they were very welcoming, I feared that they would try to eat the both of us as well. Since my brother did not want to go calmly, I forcibly lifted him off the floor and walked towards the door. He was having a tantrum, and he was screaming right in my ear. The monster around us was trying to calm him down as we walked past them, but I just ignored them and went ahead. However, my brother finally snapped and slammed his head against mine. The headbutt made a deep cut on my left eyebrow, and I was starting to bleed. As my blood was flowing across my face, it was making a trail on the floor. The werewolves and ghouls suddenly stopped walking around as if they were distracted by the smell of human blood. All of them turned their heads as their friendly expression on their faces began to change. They put out their fangs and their claws while slowly walking towards us. Because of their terrifying expressions, my brother got frightened and told them to go away. They started growling and screeching while drooling over the trail of blood that I made. They were fine with what was being served on the table, but it seemed that they preferred fresh, young kids. We were practically walking slabs of meat who voluntarily entered the den of the beasts. I thought that we were done for when they surrounded us, but the tall man who invited us in suddenly stepped forward. He told off the other guests and said that they were being rude. He came to our defense and blocked their attempts to devour us. Apparently, he forbade them to eat other guests. Despite of serving human flesh, there were rules that they had to follow in his household. Luckily for us, the guests listened to him. They calmly backed away, and the others even apologized for their rude behavior. My brother still did not understand what was happening, so I just told him not to worry about it. The tall man escorted us out of the house, and he even accompanied us until we reached the end of the street. He promised that none of his guests would come after us, but he also advised us to go home immediately. He told us that we shouldn't be wandering around a dangerous neighborhood, especially during night. Quite ironic advice from someone who was not even human. We thought that the only danger in that vicinity were the goons lurking about, but instead, we walked into a house that was more dangerous than we could have imagined. As my brother was waving goodbye, I also looked back. Aside from his imposing presence and remarkable height, he looked more human when compared to the rest of his guests. I wonder what he actually was. As I turned my head, the tall man glided in midair and disappeared in the shadows.